few videos ago, I explained to all of you that I had gotten the R6 Mark II and I wasn't sure if I was going to keep it. And I guess based off the title of this video, you can basically come to the conclusion that I kept it. So today I want to share with you a few thoughts that I have now that I've had more hands-on time with this camera. So I'm going to share some things that I love and a few things that I just can't stand. Just a disclaimer, as you know, if you've been around this channel any length of time, I am not a tech reviewer. That is not my specialty. But I am a legit pro photographer that has opinions. And so this is not going to be your standard tech review. I'm going to be focused on what it felt like to use it, what practical application was like, what was the experience like overall. If you're looking for like deep down specs and crazy things, there's other YouTube channels for you, but I'm going to be talking from a practical, real life perspective of what it was like to use a brand new camera on a full wedding day. So first things first, it actually wasn't that different. It wasn't like I was walking around this wedding day thinking, oh yeah, I'm using a brand new camera, which that is awesome because I don't think anybody really loves the feeling of like, man, everything feels completely different. So it did feel familiar to me. It didn't feel like a foreign thing that I was like pulling out of my bag and using. It felt like something that felt comfortable, and it felt a little bit like, oh yeah, this is where I've been the last 5 years, but it definitely was a different camera. I think I'm sharing that because I think for some people, especially people who are not super techie, it can be overwhelming to be like, you're just going to switch up your camera body. It wasn't a big enough shift to make me feel uncomfortable. It was not as big of a difference like the switch from the Mark IV to the R6. That was a big deal. That took a lot of practice before my first wedding. My first wedding, I felt a little bit uneasy. That was a big deal. It was nothing like that. So another positive, another thing that I love about it, it was faster and it was sharper. And as a photographer, there's not much more that you would ask of a camera. Like if it's faster and sharper, it's more reliable. You're getting more images that are in focus, and you're being able to like increase your efficiency because you know that you're locking in focus quicker. That's a pretty big upgrade. As soon as I took my first photos with this, even when I was just testing at home, that's what I noticed. It was locking in focus faster and the images were more crisp, even images with motion. I noticed that as well on a wedding day, and that's another reason why I walked away from the day thinking, I'm glad I did this thing. I'm glad I kept it. Glad I didn't return it to Best Buy. So I photographed other things beyond just a full wedding day. I photographed my kids, I photographed several family sessions, and then I realized that it's just a snappier experience. And that's probably not a very technical term, but it felt like it was always on its A game when it came to focus, when it came to locking in focus exactly where I wanted. The other thing that I love about it is that eye detection, I'm using eye detection more with this camera than I did in the past. I think the way that it detects eyes and the way that I have it set up allows me to utilize that feature when it's necessary, but also not worry about it when I just want to use my AF point with touch and drag the way I always have with the R6, not the Mark II. So it's almost like my focus system got an upgrade, but it still feels familiar. And I think it's important to say, I don't think the R6 is slow, right? I've never shot with the R6 and thought, man, this is slow. I didn't really have a reason to get the Mark II, except for the fact that I was a little bit curious, and I have a YouTube channel, and I thought I should see what it's like. And so now that I have one, I can say it is faster than the R6, but the R6 was never too slow for me to use. It was just fine. This is definitely a difference though, that I can feel. So in summary, from a positive perspective, it wasn't this crazy shock to my system when I was photographing a wedding or doing these family, and I did a newborn session, a family session. It wasn't a big change, but it was change enough to notice it like, yeah, I'm glad I upgraded. It's faster, it's snappier, it's sharper. But if you're like looking to invest in a new camera body and you're wanting to experience like this crazy overhaul of an experience, like everything feels different, that's not what you're gonna get going from the R6 to the Mark II. If you are making the transition into your mirrorless experience, I will say that it is wiser to go straight to the Mark II instead of the R6. The price difference isn't that crazy. And so I think that if I were you and I was going from a DSLR to mirrorless and I want to work with an R6, I would definitely jump to the Mark II. I think ultimately it is worth the extra cost. All right, so those were the positives. Now we're not even going to call them negatives. We're just going to call them things that aren't as positive. Things that rubbed me the wrong way, were kind of annoying, things like that. So let's start with the first one. The first one is I used more batteries than normal. I used one more battery during a wedding day than I normally would, which I also noticed this on a family shoot. It was like 75% charged, and I had to swap it out pretty quickly. And I was like, that's not what I'm used to with the normal R6. My battery life was pretty great. So I wouldn't say that this should be alarming. It's just that I'm glad that I had an extra battery on the wedding day because I did go through one extra battery than I normally would. And that was something that stood out to me as like, oh, I'm going through batteries a little faster than normal. There could be some settings that you could adjust that maybe would help you save some battery life in general. The issue is not big enough for me to even pursue that, but that could be a solution for you if you really wanted to kind of make sure that your batteries were lasting as long as possible. Speaking of batteries, another thing that wasn't awesome was that it gave little to no warning that the battery was dying. Like, I don't ever remember seeing a flashing red battery while I was shooting. At one session, it just turned off. It was dead. It was like I didn't get any like, hey, this is coming. It was just gone. So no flashing red. Like, I felt like the R6 did a good job. I had a lot of warning of like, oh man, I can get like 20 more shots in before my battery dies, but it's flashing. I never experienced that with this. So this isn't necessarily a negative for the camera. It's kind of like my error on how I normally do things. Normally I shoot RAWs on my main card, then my backup card, I have large JPEGs. That's what I've always done for years, just because it allows me to shoot pretty quickly. It allows me to never have to change like the card in the back slot. And so I was shooting all these sessions and the wedding, shooting RAW and JPEG on both. I did one family session where it seemed to get a little bit bogged down. And I realized that could have been because I was recording RAW to both and JPEG to both. I think it was because in that setting, I put a card in, when I filled up a card, I put a card in that just had a slower speed. And so it just couldn't keep up. So the combination of recording RAW to both cards, shooting fast, and the fact that I put a not so great card in, it did get bogged down a little bit. But ever since I paid more attention to like, let's just get rid of all the cards that are slower, don't even have them in my pouch as an option. Everything was formatted with this camera. I've not had a speed issue at all. But it's worth pointing out because if you're using cards that are maybe the right speed is not quite as high as it could be, you might notice that if you're a crazy fast shooter. So that's something worth mentioning. I think overall, something that was a little bit of a negative, it's not that it's bad, it's just that it's an adjustment. And anytime there's an adjustment to the workflow, it takes away a little bit of the efficiency. I noticed, at least for me, I think the photos had a little bit more of a yellow tint to them, kind of a greenish yellow tint, just slightly. If you are not like super hyper aware of white balance, you probably wouldn't even notice it. But for me, I did notice. They are different sensors, so you might see a little bit of a difference in the coloring of your images, and you're gonna have to find a way to match them. And that is a little bit of a bummer. It's not extreme. It's not super noticeable, but there is a difference. Last but not least, this is a thing that I cannot stand. Why in the world did we put the power button over here? Why? I cannot tell you how many times on the wedding day I went into video mode on accident because I'm so used to shutting it off right with my left hand. I'm still not used to this. I mean, I'm several sessions in, I'm a wedding deep, and I still cannot get used to the fact that this is on off. My muscle memory for my on off switch has not adjusted, and I don't know why. It makes me feel a little bit old, but I cannot seem to remember that on off is on the right, which is it is a bummer. So that is something I don't love, and I don't understand because there was nothing wrong, in my opinion, nothing wrong with it being on the left-hand side. So if I could change anything or have a sit-down conversation with Canon, I would just explain to them that like I just don't think that was the best move. But if that's the least of my concerns, like if that's the only thing I can really put up a fight against, then I would say that it was a pretty good decision, and I am loving it. So overall, you'll probably look back at that list and be like, those aren't really huge negatives. Some was user error, some was just annoyances. There's not really a strong negative argument for like, this is not a great camera. It really is a great camera. I am impressed. I'm glad that I kept it. But overall, I think those are just little things to be aware of so that if you are deciding to make the jump and go from the R6 to the R6 Mark II, or you're coming from DSLR to the Mark II, you're more informed and you have some idea of what to look out for as you make that transition yourself. So if you like this video and you want to learn more, specifically if you have questions about maybe my like AF setup with this camera, put your questions in the comment below. I'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoy this content in general, like and subscribe so you don't miss any episode in the future. And I will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.